Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. Welcome back to Excel Super User Program, and today we are on our day 10. It's a usual talk that I'm going to do for you, and if you want to follow along this and then you want to learn about Excel from scratch to the date, whatever I've uploaded so far for you, you can watch them in two different channel, iSelf Academy Snippet and Excel Snippet YouTube channel as Excel User Series 6.0 English version in iSelf Academy. You can also watch a Tamil version in iSelf Academy. In Excel Snippet, I'm adding only the English version for you, not the Tamil version. Again, guys, today is going to be an epic day for us because we are about to learn pivot table inside out. We're going to see not just the pivot table, anything aligned to pivot table will all be discussed in this video. This video might go beyond an hour, there is a chance, or else if I am able to conclude them all in 60 minutes time, that would be a great achievement. Again, most of the topic that we talked about it because we are seeing pivot table for the last 2 days. So I have picked up a cover page for us, and where we are about to see 60 plus different functions in pivot table. I'm going to call this particular data set as Power Pivot Table because I'm going to use two more dimensional data set, which is called Power Query and Power Pivot. I'm going to touch that at an elementary level, or I will be showing them all in one single part. If our video is going to go beyond 1 hour or 1 hour 10 minutes time, then I will move our Power Query and Power Pivot for the next session. So what my agenda right now is, again, in this we have seen enough of our data set. This particular session will go for at least 120 minutes. That's the agenda for me. I even created one earlier program in Click to Campus where I made this pivot table available for you for a fee. Again, that I did it 2 years back. So now I'm just bringing all of them literally for no cost. And please, I request every one of you to subscribe my channel, and then if you are using this and you feel it is really important and it is really giving you the knowledge that you're looking forward for in Excel, please do share it with as many people as you can, your friends, your foes if you want to, and your family and your neighbors. You add this to anyone and everyone in a data set here. Again, this is going to be a very useful set of Excel classes. If anybody wants to get a detailed idea about it, we can do that. Again, I'm going to create subsequent sessions on these where we will talk about a referential video on these topics. So wherever we wish to see something on a short burst learning will really help us, or I want to just start, I don't know how to start, I'm getting stuck when I started, so I can also do that for you. Again, when I come down to this data set, here we go, that we already talked about this completely. So what is a pivot table and what the pivot table meaning is all about, what is a proper data set, how we can create every aspect of it. So my agenda for this particular data set is this. So I'm going to pick up the data 1 here, and I'm going to follow the 30 topics that we can do in this data sets one after the one. Again, I have a simple logics here. Again, I have created this not using a pivot table. I have created this using a formula called SumIfs. Again, I've used the latest dataset for sort and unique, which will give me the dataset for me, and then I could have done this also with the sort and unique, but I'm going to use that a little differently. I'll show you how I'm going to use this in a formula bar. What I will do is I'll come down here, I'll start to create a logic called transpose here on the region front, and then once the transpose comes into play, it gives you everything, and then I want to make out of the transpose, I want to give a unique functionality. And that will give you the unique functions automatically. Again, if I want to get this as a unique function and then transpose it, even that is possible. So I'm going to go for a unique function. But again, when I do that, it will give you a spill effect for you because I'm collecting the data in a column, so it's going to give you a spill effect on top. That's okay. I'm going to convert this into transpose here. So now I'm going to do the transpose part. Again, I did it other way around earlier, so now it was not able to give me what I look for because I used the transpose first and then I gave it unique. Now I just make sure that I get the unique list first and then I'm transposing that in other dimensions. So I created these two dimensions using a formula here. Again, the formula transpose is something which is we using it for the first time with the unique combination in it. I did a sort and unique functionality here. Again, I've created a few more pivots below because I don't want to create them in a dataset, and then I've literally converted that into an ultimate value. This is the three conditions that I want to build using these data. Again, we talked about the reports that I'm going to just build using a pivot table. I'm going to build them one by one. I'm going to put them all in separate sheets so that I can use them a little betterly here. Again, we have seen until the 7th point here, and then the next logic that I'm going to do right now is I'm going to create a data set called formatting a data, and how I can create my own format in here. I can do that if I wanted to. So I can show how I'm going to do that, and then what is the number format. We already saw that, and these two dimensions will normally come in our pivot table. I will create my own style of pivot table, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to make them as default, and then how I can create the pivot report, and then how I can store the pivot reports and so on. And most of the data set we already saw enough of it. So let's just kickstart the data with the first 11 points. I'm going to be a little faster here because we did this already once. Again, for this I'm taking the first data set here at the bottom. If you see at the bottom, I have a date, a product, region, sales rep, customer, unit, sales, and the sales price and the COGS here. Again, I've got the sales directly, and then unit point is not really required, but again, I would like to put them all in one single dimension right now. So I'm going to create a pivot table. Every time when I create a pivot table, I'm going to use the pivot table in a brand new sheet. So I'm going to, and then I'm going to rename them too. So I'm going to come back to the data set. Again, we are going to do a lot of pivot table. Now, if I try to use the insert tab, that's going to take a lot of time for me to do it. I'm using the latest version in pivot table, so or in Excel, pardon me. For this, I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut for the pivot table. The most used keyboard shortcut in pivot table will be Alt NVT. If you're using Office 2013 or 16 version, then the T is not there. Alt NV will give you the pivot table for us. So I'm going to give Alt NVT. It's going to automatically add a pivot table for me. The first pivot table that I am about to create right now is I want to find out cross tab data type. Again, we never did a pivot table so far in our session in this pattern. I've shown you in our pivot table presentation earlier, but I never did this in our list here. I'm going to create this as a new sheet. I'm going to call this as okay, and then it gives you a name called sheet 3. I'm going to call this as pivot 1. So my agenda for the data set is this. I want to create a sales rep in one column and then the other dimensions on the list. Again, I did this by using a unique and sort and transpose and unique to get my result. I'm going to use a pivot table. That's going to make my life a little more easier. I'm going to give a tick mark in my region. The moment I do that, the region will pop up in my row. I'm going to tick mark in my sales rep. Even that is going to pop up in my rows here, and then I'm going to add a sales here. But what I want right now is I don't want region wise sales rep in a report right now. I want the region to come in a column and the rows should be a sales rep and the values of the sum should come in this here. So now what I want to do is I want to bring the region to the column. Probably if you remember the first class of our pivot table, I would have said that the rows and columns will be automatically populated when I give a tick mark here. But when I want anything to be on the column and filter, I'll be using the drag and drop option. So I'm going to drag the region and put them all on top. The moment I do it, that's going to give you the data set beautifully. Again, if you see, I've created a small custom format here. So it gives you the color. Normally we will not have a formatting techniques in our general pivot table. Pivot table will be straightforward and it will not have any formats. It will not always be like this with a simple data set here, but I've created a custom color format for me. Again, whenever I do this, again, yesterday itself I told you that my dataset picks the formatting beautifully because my base data has rupee symbol in it. The only thing that we will do in here is I want to get the column name and the row name properly. I don't want a row label and column label. Instead, I want a sales rep and the region to be defined in the respective dimensions here. To do this, I'll go back to my design, report layout and show in tabular form. That's going to give my answer automatically. So this is how we will create our data. I don't want to create this using a formula because when I do that in formula, it's going to take eternity to build it because I have to build them all from scratch to the top. But when I do create them in pivot table, that is the fastest way I can create a pivot table in it. Now I'm not going to use the data set in this particular pattern. I'm going to use the data set a little differently because I want my region to come in one column, my sales rep to be coming in another column, and the total to come into another column. So when I do create the same report again, the dimension of the report is going to change from a columnar, that's going to change from our cross tab data type to a column database here. So let's see how I'm going to build that. I'm going to place the cursor in here. Again, I'm going to give Alt NVT, and then that's going to give a new sheet for me. That's okay. Let's add a new sheet. I will call this as pivot 2. And this time around, I'm going to keep the same logic again. I want to start with the region. I want to start with the sales rep. I want to start with the sales here. Again, when I do that, it is giving you a custom report for me. I don't want a custom report, and I want my row label to be given as region first, sales rep next, and the sum of sales later. To do that, I'll go for the design and I'll convert this into a tabular form. The moment I do it, you can see my report is coming up in here in this particular pattern here. So when I go back to this data again, here I've removed all the subtotal functionalities here. If I don't want a subtotal function, I can remove it from my pivot 2 if I wanted to. So if I don't want to see the subtotal function in here, I go back to my design. For the first time, I'm going to just say, please don't show subtotals here. So subtotal will be removed and then you will see the data. If you don't want a grand total, you can also switch off the grand total too. Again, I kept the grand total in my data here, or I've removed it, so you can see that that data set comes beautifully here. So this is how I've created the second table for me. I'm going to create a third table. This time around, my table gives me 3 different outputs. So can I create 3 different outputs in one single shot? I doubt you cannot do that. So let me show you how we are going to build this. Again, before I do that, like we did our subtotal function in our yesterday's session where we did sum if, count if, and average if, and we want to find out whether the answer is correct or not. The same 11 function will also come in our pivot table too. But I'm going to pick up only 3 of them. Let me just show you how I'm going to build this first of all at a base level, and then how do I convert these 3 formulas in our result for me. Again, I'm going to place the cursor here, Alt NVT. It's going to give you the pop-up. I'm going to give an OK. That's going to take you to the sheet. I will rename the sheet as pivot 3, and then I'm going to add the data set. And this time around, my answer says, or I want to get this. I want to get the region wise. What is the number of sales? What is the maximum sales that I did in here? And then what is the minimum sales that I did in here? I want to find out that. So I'll go back to the data set here. I will add the region and then I will add a sales here. Automatically it gives you the sum of sales for me by default. I'm okay with that, but I don't want a sum of sales here. I would like to change that to the count of sales. So how do we do that? So first of all, let's rename the header for us. I'll go back to design, report layout, and show in tabular form. That's going to change the name of the headers here. I'm going to give a right click here, and then for the first time I'm going to go for one more dimension called summarize by value. Again, I can go into the data set and see what are the different formulas that I have here. If I want to see that, I'm going to just click the summarize value, and then I'll go for more options. That's going to give you a pop-up here. This is nothing else, our value field settings that I touched in our previous class, where I want to set the format in one dimension I did the naming part and then I did the number format. I never talked about the summarization of the field here. We can do 11 different formulas here, which will be sum, count, average, max, min, product, count number, standard deviation, sample and population, variance, sample and population. Again, if I give a right click here and then if you see, I have one more dimension that comes in the summarize value is called distinct count. Again, that is not activated, that is disabled right now because my data is not added to a specific data set. So I will talk about that as we go forward. If I want to count a distinct data set, or if I want to give a distinct count for a list here, because when I give a count, it gives you a count. But again, most of the time, if I want a distinct count of a product, it might not give you the distinct count, because if I want to get a distinct count of it, then that will make my life a little more different here. So I'll show you what is a distinct count as we go forward. So now I've created this, but I want to give a count of number here. I'm going to select count here. Now I got the first list, I got the count of sales here, but how do I bring the other two dimensions here? I want to get the max and I want to get the min. I'm not going to do anything very big here. Again, it is like works like our WhatsApp. Again, in WhatsApp we will have a double tick. Here we will have only one tick, so I cannot tick them twice here to get the value twice. For this, even though when I check the box, it gives you one output for me, it won't give you multiple output. If you want a multiple output of the same field in pivot table, I will drag and drop it. So I'm going to drag and drop it 2 times here. That's going to give you 2 different conditions here. And it always starts with the sum function because that's the first summarization formula for me in pivot table. I'm going to give a right click in here, go back to summarize value and then say max. And then right click here, go to the summarize value and then say min. And if you closely watch this data gives you information beautifully. Earlier I have to literally rename them one by one. Here I no longer want to do that, so I'm going to go back and then change this to count. Let me see whether it is allowing me. Yes, it is allowing me. Max, because all of them earlier came in sales, so I can just edit it here itself. If I want to see what's happening in my value field settings, I can also give a right click here and see, because my source name is a sales. I'm converting my sales into count of sales, max of sales and min of sales. So I'm just giving you the condition that I'm adding in here. I'm not adding anything other than that. So this is how we will create our first 3 different reporting that I did a while ago. We talked about the pivot table a lot. I'm going to talk about the data set on how to format a specific format here. As we are approaching our Independence Day, Republic Day, I would like to change this format to a specific dimension. Again, this can be done if you go to a pivot table and then go to the design tab of it, and then when I click this, you can see there is already an inbuilt functionality that we have here. If you feel that that is way too much for me to absorb, I would like to keep one particular new kind of data set, and then I want to keep that data set to a specific dimension. I'm going to go back to new and then I'm going to rename this as Republic Day, or I'll call this as Flag Day. When I go down to this point, again you have a lot of things to do. You can go for a whole table, report filter label, report filter values, and so on and so forth. I'm going to use only 2 of them here. I'm not going to use not all of them, so I'm going to just scroll down this and then go to my header and then format the header here. Again, when I go back to the format header, again I'm going to use the standardization of colors always. I'll go to fill, I'll add orange, or I can just go for more color here so I can find out how the saffron comes in here. So again I'm going to use a saffron here, be kind of a little more darker orange, and then I'm going to give an OK. That's going to give you the formatting part. And if you want to make the font color to be specific, I can make it bold and then I'll keep it as black here. If you want to keep it as white, nothing wrong in it. I don't know whether the white will work. I'll pick up a grayscale, a bit of grayscale here. So that's going to add me the first list here. You can see that now I have added the data set here. Again, I want to make sure the data set comes nice and clearly. I'm going to give and then edit this again. And if you have done something and then in between you have missed something, you can also make those components work beautifully here. So I'm going to pick up the font color and then make them white. Let me bring the fill colors as this. Okay, that's perfect. And then I'm going to scroll down to the last line and pick up the grand total. That means that will be giving you the color for my grand total here. I'm going to format that with a darker green here, and then I'll go back to the font and make it bold and white in here. I'm going to give an OK, and now this is how the dataset will come into play. If I want to add a total symbols in this, or if I want to add a border, I can go back to the format, add a border here. So I'm going to add a lighter border for this, maybe a double border for the bottom. So I'm going to give an accounting point here. Now we can see that I just did one dimension. Again, this will be in my custom cell. Now whatever I want to change here, I can do that. I can swap this to the other dimensions here. And then I'll come back here, and then I'll come back to this data, and then swap it to this. You can see that when my format is changing according to the data set. When I come down here, I don't have the bottom part of it is data, so it doesn't show me the bottom. When I go for the table 3 or pivot table 1, you can see the coloring is automatically happening in every aspect of it. So this is how we can color the data when we come back to the data sets here. So we literally saw data until creating point, and if you closely watch, when I set this formatting, I can set the system in such a way that every time when I create a pivot table, I want this format to apply automatically. To do that, I'm going to go back to the design again. I'll go back to the modify datasets here. At the bottom, you will see a line called set as a default pivot table style for this document. So when I open this documentation will always have this as my default documentation style here. So every time when I create, when I add a documentation style, this is going to give this as my default point too. You can set that in your list here. Normally when I create a pivot table, most of the pivot table works beautifully. Yesterday we created a pivot table also, and then we saw how the pivot table catchy is remained as same, because I have not created a pivot table catchy multiple times. Now by default Excel gives you only one catchy. If I try to create a new table right now, whatever the format that I will do to my data set on the first front, that will be automatically taken to the subsequent front also. This is actually added in the version 2013. Now we have a lot of other options which we can go back and forth in Office 365, but still this catchy will work for you. Again, we talked about this when we come back to our previous class where we talked about, or the first class of pivot table where I talked about pivot table auto updates by a table feature data and pivot table non-auto updates when I come back to my range data here. And when I go back to pivot table, again, I've just gave you an idea about how many different formulas that we can add in a pivot table. These are the formulas will be added in a pivot table. And if I want a data set which is like distinct count, then I need the pivot table to switch on, or when I create a pivot table, I need a pivot table to switch on the data model at the bottom. Let me just show you how this data will come into play. Again, I'm not going to use it. I'll just show you where this data set will be available. When I give Alt NVT, at the bottom of your screen, you can see a line called add this data to a data model. If you want a distinct count to come into play in the summarization of a data, you will be using this as your tool to get your data set work for you. That is how we build our data set. If you want a distinct count to come into play, then you can pick that as your list here. Again, that's what it will do. And then you can also refresh a pivot table every time if you are adding a data set, and then you can analyze the pivot table data set tools here, and then you can add whatever changes that you want to add to a data set here. In some situation, we can even copy and paste a pivot table report, and you can also add a filter to it. So for example, I'm creating one more pivot table below, and then I'm show what I will try to do here. So I'm going to create 3 different dimensions in a data set. I want to know the product, region, and the sales rep. I want to see all these 3 dimensions, and I would like to keep the region as a filter field, not any other field. So to do that, I'm going to place the cursor in here, Alt NVT. It's going to pop up data for me. I'm going to give an OK. I'm not going to use anything figured out of it. I'm going to add a product, which will automatically give you all the products here. I'm going to add a region, and the region will automatically come to the row. I add a sales rep. Again, it's giving you the bottom of the point. I'll give a sales here. So now we can see automatically it adds my formatting to the data set automatically, but I would like to keep the region in the column and the product in the filter. So now you can see the data set is coming really differently, and then I'll go back and do the general changes, show in tabular form, and now the data set gives you the complete list. We all know that in a pivot table we can add a slicer. I would like to add a slicer for all the three of the data so that I can slice and dice anything that I want. I'll place the cursor in here. I'll go back to my pivot table analysis and then add a slicer here, and then I'm going to add the product, region and rep and give an OK. If I can able to see all of them in one single shot, then I'll just align them one next to the other one. I will rearrange them. I'm not going to color that right now. If you want to add a color to it, I can add a color here. So let me come back to this point. I'm going to convert this into an orange, and then I'm going to convert this into a green, and probably I'll try to do a white here. I don't know whether we have a white here, so let me just add a color and then modify this color to something else. So it's like cannot I have to modify this. So now I'm keeping it as is because I cannot try the white one for it. So let me just remove it. I keep it as gray. Now if I want to pick up a product called quad, then my answer will change accordingly. If I want to know what is the sales done by Evie, I'm going to pick her, and then I can see that what are the areas that Evie was concentrating when she sold a product. And if I change that to money, or if I change that to Deepa, or if I change that to Arjun, so that's going to change the entire data set for us. If I don't want all of them, I can just clear them accordingly. I can take multiple point also if I wanted to. I will pick up these 2 dimensions. Now I know the 2 products, and I want 2 regions, and then I want my female staff, how many people have sold this to a point. So now I know what is the sales done by my population. Again I'm being more generic or gender based here. I'm not a gender based person, but again I would like to just showcase the differences between the number of people who work with me in my organization is too bigger than the number of people who work with me on my gender to another list. So you can see them all in this list. So if I clear the products, so I know I'll see all the products sales. If I clear the region, I'll see all of them. When I clear this, I'll see all the data set back again. You can create a pivot table not just in a cross tab data type, but also you can add a filter to it. I renamed this particular pivot table as pivot 4 here. So this is how we will do it. And again, I touched the last field of slices here a bit on this page, and then we can add whatever we want to do with it. And I showed you how we can automatically activate the data sets here, and you can also change the data. For example, now I gave on the pivot table 4, I gave everything. Now I want to just change the entire prospects of the table right now. I don't need them anymore as sum of sales. I want to find out the average sales in it. So what I'll do is I'll give a right click here. I will move and copy the data set in a brand new data, and then I will rename that as pivot 5. And then I'll move that prior to my data set here, and then I'm going to give a right click here, and then I'll summarize the value by average. So you can see that now the average sales of every one is coming up here. If you want to duplicate this in multiple pages, generally if you want to create one or more than one pivot table in a range, please do it on the column front, not on the row front, because if the data set is going to grow here, then I will be in a spot of bother. So I'll copy this and then I'll paste it in the S column. Now I want the data set to come out as count. And if you want to add the max out of it, just you can add the counts for us. So I'm going to just come down here, copy this, paste it in A, copy this and paste it in AJ, and then I'm going to give a right click here and then summarize the value by the maximum value. Right click here, summarize the value by minimum value here. You can do a lot more than this. I'm just creating all the math calculation that we normally perform in a math operation. So I'm just creating all of this dimension here. So this is how we can copy and paste pivot table, and then you can add the different functionality that you want in a list here. Again, when I go back to this, again, what will be a difference between a pivot table and a formula? So pivot table allows you to create things or create a calculation at a much faster rate. That's going to be a little longer in a formula. Again, pivot table can refresh the data sources, whether it is a data where we are doing it with a range based or in a table based functionality. And again, formula automatically updates it. Formula has a better edge than a pivot table. That's why in our dynamic spilled array function we have 2 more new formulas added, group by and pivot by. When we come back to that point, I'll tell you where a pivot table is going to be replaceable in the near future. You can also pivot the report and add and remove the whole category and criteria according to the list, and that is not that easy when you're using a formula. And then when you change the functionality, changing a functionality is also easy. Changing a functionality in a formula, again, I did that in our previous class where I tried to create a sum if an average if. I have to re-edit the entire data set. If I'm changing an average if output to a count if output, then I have to know the formulas capability, and then based on that I will change the data set for us. That will be a little complex. I won't call it as more difficult, but again it is a little complex compared to the pivot table. When I go for pivot table, I have only 11 functions to do so. When I come back to formula, I have 450 functions by default, plus how many functions furthermore that I recently added will be around another 39 dynamic spilled array functionality in our list here. And then the format is limited to the pivot table, but formatting is less limited in pivot table. I can go to any extent in a formula based data sets. That's the difference between a formula and a pivot table. And now we are going to create the most of the data sets in our list. And we also talked about value field settings in our previous 2 data set here. Again, when I come back to the data, what kind of a report that I will get when I use a text condition in a value? Normally this will not automatically happen, because when you are working on a data set, if I create a pivot table and a text field will never be a part of my value box here. So when I check the product here, it is always going to go for my rows here, and when I select a region, it will always go for my row here. What I want right now is I want to know how many products do I have here on count front. Then what I will do is I will normally give a tick box in the product, and then I will drag and drop the product again to the value here. By that way, it gives you Belen how many products I had, call letter how many I had, quad, sunsets and sunshine how much I had. You can see that the moment I add a text field to the value, it is not going to give you anything other than a count. When I go for summarization of value, you can see every other aspects are blunt here, or this is not going to summarize, allow you to summarize the data by a sum or average or max or min, because they are all math functionality. They need a number field. So a text will not allow you to get that for you. So this is how we can create a text-based information for us if I wanted to. That's the way we will build our data here. Again, the next logic is the number. Again, we already know how to use the numbers here, and you can also do counting criteria here. You can go by counts, and then you can even have a mixed data in a count functionality if you wanted to. Normally when I go for a pivot table, this is how we'll do it. We'll normally give a tick box in the data set, or we can use the drag and drop option to make our data work better. In some situation, when I have a lot of data with me, I can expand and collapse the data beautifully. So how do I do that? So let's go back to the data where we had a lot of data, and if you see this data, everything is clearly mentioned here. Now you can see that my data I can collapse and I can just see only the region here, not the sales rep here. Normally I cannot do on sit and click this like this. I'll give a right click here and I have a formula or I have a data set here. I can say expand it. So that's going to expand only the first data for me. But I want to expand all of them in one shot, then I'll expand this, the entire field. So that's going to expand everything. I can also do the collapse part of the same, or I can just expand all of them, collapse only one of them. So you can do expand the data and you can do collapse the data however you want it to be. So this is how we will normally expand it. Again, this will not normally appear in a single column data sets. Now you can see wherever I have a single column data set, I don't have the facility of expanding them. Wherever I have a multiple column data or a data which has data sets comes one below the other. So now I have a detailed expansions here, and if I want this to come in the compact format, I can do that. I'm going to go back to the design, and in the report level I'll use the first option. So this is going to be one below the other one, and when I just come back here, I can just collapse all of them, or I just did one collapse here. I can just make the collapse to the entire field here. So this will be showing a plus point. When I click the plus button, it's going to expand only on one column. It is not going to go for the other column. Again, when I do that, the role label tabs will not showcase the header's name here. So I'm going to give a right click here. I can expand all of them. I can also collapse all of them with ease here. You can also add one more dimension here. I can go back to the expand option here. The moment I expand it, I'm not able to see the total sales of each and every data set. I'm going to go back to my grand total. I'm going to switch on the row and column total here. And I can also add a subtotal here. I want to show the subtotal on top of the group here, so that way the subtotal will come onto the top of the data sets here. You can add anything that you want. You can switch off what you don't want here. You can make it anyway, because when I make it at the bottom, it will add a new line for me. But when I make it on top, it's not going to add a new line. It's going to add the data automatically here. So now I can just collapse them all in one single shot. That way it's going to collapse the data and showcase the data. And this is how we will use expand and collapse here. And I showed you how to create the three conditions here in the first instance itself. You can add three conditions. And normally when I create a pivot table, this is going to give you the answer as a consolidation. I told you a pivot table is a summarization of a data. But summarization of data comes from where? So how do I find out that? So if I want to know what is the sales done by Arjun, I can easily get that. I'm going to give a double click in my grand total function. The moment I do that, that's going to create a new sheet called a detail one for me, and it's going to give you all my Arjun sales alone, or all the data belong to Arjun will be automatically added here. I can see them all nice and clearly here. So this is the advantage that I have when I do deal with the data sets here. So you can add all our data set and then you can just make the changes accordingly. So you can see the detailed data, and I'm doing it only for Arjun right now. But again, if I can do it for others, I'll get the other dimension. Again, if I want to only the East region, then I'll double click this. That's going to give you the East region and Arjun here, and then that's going to be even more detailed for me. If I have more data with me, I can pick up the data and find out whether my data are coming correctly or not. I can get all those information in a detailed format. If I wanted to, I can just go to this and then that's create a new sheet, and it gives you the detailed part for me. And we all know that how to create a pivot chart. Again, if I want a pivot chart in here, I'm going to come down here. I'm going to just create Alt F1. That's going to add my pivot chart automatically. Then I'll just make the changes that is required, and then I can add the respective headers to the data set, and then I can add a lot more than what we normally do in a data set. This is our data one part where I've tried to complete 30 different functionality. I did the slices already, so these are the 30 different topics that we can do to create pivot table better. Again, pivot table does even more than this, so let's see what it can do furthermore. I'm going to go to the data 2. Here I'm going to create 2 different dimensions, or I can also use the old school method of creating a pivot table if I wanted to. Again, when I go for the pivot table on the old school methodology, it's going to create a cache every time when I create a new pivot table here. So let me just show you what is it. The first part that I'm going to do right now is I want to create the grouping function. Again, if I want to create a grouping function, I don't want to do anything very big in Office 365 because the default date will automatically group it for you. So how we are going to see this? So normally when I add the data, I'm going to place the cursor here. Again, I'm going to use Alt NVT, and then I'm going to create a formula. Now the pivot table will apply or bring a new sheet in front of data 2. I'm going to call this as pivot 7. Let me add a date here. The moment I add the date, it will automatically group it to 4 different dimensions because I have data beyond a year here. So you can see that the year is coming first and the other dimension coming into later. If I'm looking for every month sales to a specific year, then I don't need all of them. I'm going to remove the date out of the equation and I'm going to remove the quarter out of the equation. That's going to give the list here. Again, now my data set is in a compact format. I'm going to go back to my design, report layer and show in table form. That's going to expand the data set, and it is collapsed right now because that's what I did earlier. So I'm going to expand them all in this data. If you want them as a compact data set, I'll just bring them in this way, so that way it can show it. If I don't add a year, again, now it is grouping beautifully. That's making my life a little more easier. But unfortunately, this will not happen in our old school version of it, or there is anything prior to 2013 version. We don't have auto grouping coming up here. We get a data a little weirdly here. Now I can just find out any one of them. I want to find out the total, how many, what I can take that revenue in here. Now I know each and every revenue. If I don't want a subtotal on top of it, so let me just remove the subtotal. That's going to give you the data set here, and then I can just see them all in one single shot. If I want to change this to average sales, I can summarize this part by an average. That's going to give you an average, and I don't want the name of the file to be very big, so I'll go back to so I'm making the heading into as readable because I don't want a bigger heading and then the data is smaller. That looks really odd. So now I remove the average point of it. So if I bring back the summarization of it of sum again, that's going to change the data. Again, every time when I do this, make sure that we have all of them coming up properly. So you can make it as small as possible. As long as you and your department people can read them all nicely, you can set them according to your dimension here. So now you can see the grouping is happening automatically. Now I will create a pivot table, but before I do that, I'm going to just remove and show how this is going to work for us. So I'm going to go back to my file and options here, and then we talked about it earlier. I'm going to go for data and then disable the auto grouping option here. Now I'm going to create the pivot table in the same sheet but in F column. So how do I do that? So this is where I'll go back to my pivot table here. Once I hit an Alt NVT, once it pops up the data, I'm going to convert this into existing worksheet, or you can give Alt E to go to that field, and then I can just click this button and then go to my pivot 7 and add it in F column, and then I'm going to just give an OK here. The moment I do that, that's going to add the pivot cache for me here, and then I'm going to add the date here. The moment I do that, the date is not going to be grouped here. Again, why I did this right now is I want to show you the grouping techniques will be a little different. So when I normally go around here, now I had data for 3 long years of data. The system automatically took the date, the month, the quarter, the year automatically. I'm going to give a right click here. I'll go back to the group here, but again we can do a lot more than that. Again, at the moment it is again giving you, this is the way the grouping is already done in the current sheet, because my pivot cache will still retain the pivot cache in the same pattern for me. Now I want to remove all these dimensions. I want to add a days here. And now I know the start date of the data set and the end date of the data set, and the number of days that I'm going to accumulate right now is 1 by 1. That's what it shows. Now I want to add this on a week front. So, or if I want 7 days once, then I can just come down here and I'll add a 7 here. And then when I give an OK, that's going to showcase the data a little differently. Again, my pivot cache updates on the other data set also, though that's going to really create a mess if I create the same pivot, or I create the pivot table with the same intention of doing it. So that's the only reason why I never created a pivot table earlier in the same sheet, because the moment the cache comes into play, I'm in a spot of bother, because it's going to pick up the new cache to the old cache, and then it's going to give you all the information accordingly. Now I can get the line revenue coming up automatically for me. So now I know the sales between the first week and second week. Again, most of the data are coming perfectly here. Again, I don't want the grouping to happen in this way, so I'm going to call this as this. So now when I do that, it is changing in here also. So this is how the data set will weirdly behave when we are working on it. Again, I want to show the different grouping here, that's why I did it. So let me just remove this completely out of the equation, and let me just add another pivot table for us in a new sheet for us, because I don't want to keep it in the same sheet, because I want to create that variant report for me, and I can just see how this data set can really do wonders for us. You can add as many days as you want. You can just say 5 days a week, something like that. It's going to give you a different dimension altogether. That's the way it works for you. So you can group the data differently. Again, normal grouping will not give you the weekly front, because our date hierarchy comes only for the dimensions like date, month, quarter and year. It doesn't have the dimension that we are looking forward, where we have a week number coming up here. So this is how we will create our data. So this is going to be my pivot 8. You can do this also for a time. So again, I'm going to go back to my insert, or I will hit an NVT here. I'm going to give an OK. I'll take the time this time around, and I can use a detail point for me. I'm going to give a right click. I go to the group, and I'm going to say hourly basis. Give the time for me. Immediately it curtails everything to an hour, and I would like to know the number of sales that we did, or the revenue that we made in a period. So that's going to showcase the list here. And now if I want to see the pattern or trend of sales here, I'm going to give Alt F1. That's going to give you my chart for the day. And then I know my sales are mostly happening between 10 AM to 4 PM. Again, this is giving you everything in 24 hours here. If you want them to be in another dimension, let me see whether I selected everything as 24 hours. Yes, the valuation is 24 hours right now, because I set the system in such a way that I want all my answers to come in 24 hours here. If I can reduce that to maybe some other timing, then it will become a different dimension. So now I know that my sales are happening between 10 AM to 4 PM, or 10 hours to 16 hours. The sales are huge. So now if I add a number on top of it, you can understand that really very clearly, and you can see that the sales pattern is consistently good on this day. Again, it's not going by day, it is going by time for us. So we'll create a group data set. Again, for every data set I need, or for every result I need a timeline to work around with it. You can group the time by any dimension that you want. Again, now what did I do is I created the data set by hour. If I want every 15 minutes once, I can again do that. Again, the only thing that I have to do is I have to just group the data set in minutes, and then I have to tell the system that please group them all in 15 minutes dimension. So when I give a tick mark, It's going to add everything for me. I'm going to give a right click here. I want the grouping to come into play by hour and minute, or I'll take minutes here, and then again okay, the amount minutes is not allowing me to get the okay. If you go by minute, it goes by minute only. Okay, I cannot group the data by minute. I can group either by hour and minute, and then that's going to give you the breakup of the minutes here. Let me just try to see. I can able to group them again. I can group it, but unfortunately I'm not able to group them by a specific set of minutes here. So this is allowing me to only add hour and minute as two different dimensions, but it is not allowing me to do that in a different dimension. So you can even get a report which is even more detailed now, and I will add a slicer to it. So I want to see every hour how it works for me. And then I can pick up an hour here. So by that way I can see the hour for it. So how every minute of the data set works for me beautifully here. A minute one, because wherever the sales has happened, only that minute is coming up for 8 hours. So if I change 9 hours, again the data set is going to change, because what timing that the respective sales has been recorded, only that time will come into play. You won't see 1 to 60 seconds all of them coming in one single dimension. You won't see a single 60 chance here. In some situation we are getting that, but not everywhere we are getting it. We are not getting 60 counts here. So I'm missing some numbers of the other here, and I can reduce it. I can just go back. A collapse and expand can be done by this also. Again, I didn't go for a pivot table. I'm going for a pivot chart to collapse this. So this is the way we can build our filtration here. I will go for one more dimension, which is called, or I'll see whether we can able to cover one more dimension today. So the next logic that I wish to showcase. Okay, so we can try again. This is something is going to become bigger. Okay, right. I'll try to cover. Yeah, I will try to cover the 33rd point today. So because we have some serious content coming up next, so we will put them all on Monday so that we can just add all these dimensions. I showed you the summarization of data. I'll show you how to showcase other dimensions of data in pivot table for us. I will end our session with one more topic called the old school method of pivot table. So how do I create an old school method of pivot table? Again, if I want my catch sheet to appear separately for each and every dimension, so I want a unique catch sheet to come into play, I will use a keyboard shortcut called Alt DP, and the screen is going to become very different here. Again, you will see a lot more here. You no longer want to go for a separate keyboard shortcut in our list. So when I normally go for a pivot table, you will see this. All of them are coming up here. I can see a table and a range, an external data source, and a data model, and a Power BI connection also. So I'm going to just create the old school methodology. I'm going to give a next, and then I'm going to give a next, and then it says that your new report will use lesser memory if you base it on your existing report, Power Pivot Table Sheets, which is created from the same data source. Do you want the new report to be based on the same data as its data? If you click yes, you will save memory and your workbook file will be smaller. If you click no, the two report will be separate. If you closely watch, this is the feature that is added in our 2013 version, where the cache will be in the same memory, because whatever the memory that we saved earlier, because when I try to create reports of the time and date earlier, when I change the data set in one table to time and the other table to the reporting part, it has picked the previous data or it picked the new data to the old data also. Let's try whether this is going to work, because I didn't work it for a very long time. So I'm going to use the no option here, because I don't want the data set to come in place, and I want to say finish here. So now this is adding a list. So I'm going to add a date here, and then I'm going to add the line item here, and then I'm going to group them all by year and a month. And now I want to create another pivot table and place them in the same sheet again. And again, this is my pivot 10. And this is my pivot 11. Again, in the pivot 11, I'm going to create two different pivot tables with the same data. But this time around, I'm going to use the old school methodology. Again, the same error message will come again when I start creating this. I'm going to say no to it. I'm going to just pick up an existing sheet here, and then I'm going to pick up pivot 11 and then add in here and give a finish button, and then I'm going to add a time, then I'm going to add the line diagram, and then I'm going to give a right click here, and then I'm going to group that by hour and a minute. And if you closely watch, the old school methodology works beautifully. Actually, this is gonna spend a lot of energy or a lot of space here, but they are not one single cache. The left hand side table goes by the year and the date functionality, the right side goes by the time functionality, both of them living in the same worksheet. This I cannot able to do it a while ago when I tried to create a sheet here. So when I tried to create a sheet here, that's why I created two different pivot tables a little later to showcase the data differently. Again, when I come back here, the pivot cache is still taking the data set grouping. So now I go back to the group here, and then I'm removing all of them. I'm going to try to give hover and a minute and give an OK. Now we can see that the hover and a minute comes in play, and you can see that the entire data set changed on the previous table. Also, that is not happening when I come back to the old school way of creating a pivot table. If I want multiple reports to come in a single sheet, or multiple pivot table to come in a single sheet, but more than one dimension is added, I don't want my pivot table to be disturbed by the other formatting or other way of grouping, then I will preferably use the old school method of pivot table, which is called 2003 version, where I'll use Alt TP. Again, this session is really kicking into a great time, and I completed 33 counts out of our 60 plus data set. I am planning to give 64 different functionalities in the Power Pivot table for us. Now I completed 33 today because I don't want to add a lot. I want to give some time for you to reflect what we have learned so far in our data. When we come back on data 3, we'll talk about where the grouping cannot happen, where we will get a very weird answer when we are trying to group in a number format. So how we can rectify that, we'll see that. If there is an error in the data set, how pivot table will not allow you to do what I want to do. And when I go back to my next data set, where I will be seeing in the next class called how to use a recommended pivot table, how to use a recommended pivot chart, report filter, I just touched a bit. I will show you how I'm going to do that, how I can show a filter, how I can slicer it. Again, I did the slices again one more time for us, how I can use the slicer and filter together, and timeline. We all touch this at a base level. We are going to touch this a little more on a deeper front when we come back to data 4, and we will see a lot more here. So when I normally created a pivot table here, when I tried to summarize this data, I did summarization. So we are going to see one more dimension called show value as. We have grand total column, grand total row, column total, row total, parent row total, percentage of parent row total, difference from running total, ranking from smallest to largest, largest to smallest. We can do a lot more. We can also serial number it, or we can index a pivot table if I wanted to. So this is what we are going to see when we come back to our data 5. And finally, when I come back to data 6, this is where I'll touch our data, how to create a distinct count by adding the data to a data model, and how I can compare and contrast two data and combine them into one in a data set, and then where I can try to compare and contrast what is the sales done by a specific region, by a specific sales representative, by creating a relationship between the table with one another. This will replace our VLOOKUP function that we normally do, and then add a pivot table. I can keep two different tables wherever they are. Still I can combine them and get a result out of it. So this is a beautiful topic that we touched today, and I finished until 33 topics so far today. So when we come back here, and this will allow us to learn more about pivot table better. We are going to start with 34th topic, and then we will go on and finish until 64th. So we have another 21 more topic to cover. So when we come back on Monday, we will work on this data set. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great weekend ahead for us. Please do watch this video, and then we are completing our pivot table by the next session that we are doing it. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Happy learning.